right, welcome back to the Sean Trey Show. Today I have a really awesome guest with me. Would you like to introduce yourself and tell people who you are and what you do?
Yes, hi, thanks for having me. I'm Alexandra Schaller, and I'm a production designer in film and TV.
Awesome.
And commercials.
And commercials. Now,
and music videos.
Awesome. What does a production designer do?
Wow. Well, production designers really create the visual world of everything that you see on camera. So we are along with the director and the director of photography, but we are the visualizers of the world, and we communicate the ideas and themes from the script visually.
That's really interesting because I was thinking about that. My daughter's 5. And she has this great question. She loves cinema. She loves movies. My wife is a famous singer here in Vietnam. She was the first winner of Vietnam Idol, and she
cool.
loves big sets and big songs. And our daughter's favorite movie is The Greatest Showman, and she loves it. And one of her questions, and this is a really interesting question because I never conceptualized it, but she's like, "Are they in our world?" And she always asks, "Are they in our world or a different world, Daddy?" And so we'll watch something on TV or the news, so we had to explain Hugh Jackman's in our world, but the movie was a different world. She's like, "Oh, well, I like Hugh Jackman." I was like, "Well, most people do. He's pretty.
Most people do,
pretty
yeah.
Cool." Right?
That's an amazing question for a 5-year-old. Wow.
Right? She's with it, man. And so she's like, "Is it our world or another world?" And it's one of the interesting things is that a lot of people don't understand the simple scale of world building that goes into productions. Now, how do you begin to approach a film or a TV show or a music video? What's kind of your process for creating that world?
Well, the first thing is to really respond to the material. There's so many projects out there, and some might be a good fit for some people, and not for others. And so I'm pretty meticulous about, at least in the narrative space, so film and television. I'm very specific about the jobs that I take on, and I'll read the script the first time, and generally I know that I'm really connecting with a project if I immediately start to visualize the world.
Nice.
So, I'll read the script first, just quickly, have a sort of intuitive response to the material. And if it's something that I'm thinking about later, whether it's an hour later or 2 days later, depending on how much time I have to decide whether or not I'd like to meet with the filmmaker, I'll read it again, and then I'll start pulling images. Just my first immediate response to what I felt when I read it. Because for me, everything comes from a place of, well, how do we want this to feel? So it might be like a close-up shot of some orange peel, or it might be an atmospheric shot of the woods, or whatever it is. And then I'll start to kind of hone those images into a visual story that I'll then take to a meeting with the director, and we'll go through it, and then they will guide me from there, either in any direction or forwards.
That's awesome. Now. What are some of the projects that you get something that can be a small scale, like world building, where you're working in a room or something, versus much larger things. I'm trying to figure out how to phrase that question. First of all, what are you working on right now?
Well, I just finished a show called Why the Last Man, which is based on a series of graphic novels by the same name that are airing at the moment on Hulu. So it's FX on Hulu show. And I worked on that for almost 2 years with COVID.
Oh, wow.
So I've just finished that, and I'm back. I traveled the world to get some inspiration, and now I'm back home and I'm kind of looking for the next thing. But what was really cool was that right towards the end of the show, the Canadian border, we were shooting in Toronto, opened up, and I was able to go to the Cannes Film Festival, where a movie I had designed before I started Y was screening.
Nice.
And it was kind of crazy because it was like the first international travel, like being in a different place. And I watched the movie, and the movie is a very, very, very different project to Y the Last Man. So it was kind of weird being catapulted not only into this other country, but into the world of this other movie that I had inhabited so intimately before I stepped into the Y world. And so that kind of brings us to what you were talking about, right? Different kinds of projects. So that was an independent movie. It was it's a very kind of beautiful existential movie. And, Y is kind of action-packed, like big show. So it's kind of interesting, and to go back to your question about process, I feel like the project is different, but the process is the same. It's a connection with the material. It's to be able to visualize the world, pulling references and getting inspired and kind of building from there. And with the movie that I did that was at Cannes, it was called After Yang, directed by Kogonada, and it really centers quite closely around this one family and where they live, and their home was a really big character in the movie. And in Y, it's a road show. There are many, many storylines, and it's a road show where we're traveling all over the United States. And so it's less about kind of the character in terms of personality of a set than it is about telling the story of a world.
Interesting.
If that makes sense. But I guess they're both telling stories of a world, but yeah. Because in Y, the characters are going through so many spaces, so none of them is really their own space, I guess is what I mean. Mm-hmm.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. It's kind of the different frame of reference as well, because like one scale would be kind of it sounds like from what you're describing in Yang. Was it Yang?
It's called After Yang.
After Yang, they're contained within this world, but like you said, in Y, they're traveling through a larger world. That's interesting. Now that makes me. One of the things that I am not a production designer. I do not have this frame of reference, but one of the things that you talked about that actually is interesting to me and that I can kind of process is, I remember as a kid reading the books, The Chronicles of Narnia. And in my head, I visualized what Narnia looked like. And a lot of people, when they read books, they have that, that mental image that pops up. And it was interesting when I watched the movies, I was like, this isn't what I pictured Narnia looking like. And it was interesting because it was just a different conceptual visuals. It was beautiful, but it was in my head. I was like, oh, that's different, And so it's really interesting that I love that term that you use, your intuition and kind of that gut feeling. Do you have any, do you sit there and like jot things down as you're reading? Do you have like a sketchbook or something? Or how do you put that on paper?
It's kind of all different ways depending on what the image is. I start by kind of scouring the internet and for image references, and I have an enormous library of books, and so I'm quite a tactile person, and so I'll get out all my books and I'll start post-itting and or sketching or any number of ways. But what I love about what you just said and about design, and actually the costume designer from Y and I talked about this a lot, but it's like the project will vary so much depending on who designs it, right?
Yeah.
It's because the way I imagine something is not the way you imagined it. And that was really interesting with After Yang, because After Yang is set in the future. And it's a period movie, but it's a period that doesn't exist. And everybody is so saturated with images of what the future looks like. And so the challenge was, well, how are we going to make our own future that nobody has seen? And then we're like, well, does this look like the future? Does that look like the future? But actually, of course it does, because it doesn't exist.
Yeah. That's really interesting. And, especially with thinking about things, future type movies, because, you can get, Yeah, I was listening to the Tron soundtrack. I love the new Tron
cool.
movie.
I haven't seen it.
Oh, it's beautiful. It's cinematic.
Okay.
It's beautiful. It's just really beautiful. The scene and I'm not giving away any plot details, but the scene in the house where, oh my goodness, I'm blanking on names right now. Where the dude from The Big Lebowski,
Jeff Bridges.
Jeff Bridges is in this house with the young guy Garrett Hedlund, and they're in this house that Jeff Bridges has been living in this other world. It's just like one of the most beautiful like sets I've ever seen. It's just stunning. But then you contrast that with Blade Runner 2049. Another very futuristic, very dark, very. It's interesting to see how people visualize the future. Now, how did you approach? What was your approach for the future with Yang?
It's a very special movie because. Well, for a lot of reasons. But how did I approach the future? Well, I think it all goes back to how do we want an audience to feel? Just to go back a little bit, so I'm working mostly in film and television, but my background is in immersive theater and performance, and so much of the storytelling is putting an audience right in the middle, feeling like they're part of it, and that's what we wanted. I feel like that's the goal for any project, right? But especially a futuristic movie, we wanted a different version of the future. We wanted a future that was warm and welcoming, and not kind of this austere kind of strip lighting future that we've seen.
Yeah, right.
So far. And so it's not that. Like, it's a future where you're going to see a lamp that looks not so different from your own, for example. And so it was like, how do we want the audience to feel? Well, we want to feel at home in this future. And so we kind of, the director and I talked about kind of what that means, and what is it to feel at home and to feel comfortable and to feel warm. And so that's how we started.
That's really awesome. Now, it's really interesting that you talk about immersive theater, because I know of one, the great immersive theater experience that I used to always, drive past when I lived in LA, and not the most classical, but the Point Break Live was this. Did you ever hear about Point Break Live?
No.
It was Point Break Live was a long-running theater show in LA in which it was a live production of Point Break, and they always picked someone out of the audience to play Keanu.
Oh my gosh.
And they would play it with cue cards, and they have these great wigs, and it was, like super surfer Point Break. But it was interesting because they brought people in, and people were always involved, and it was immersive, and it was kind of like, it was funny, it was tongue in cheek, but one of the beautiful things of that was that for a period of time, people were able to get out of their seats, and they were in that world, and they existed in that world, even if it was just for a short time. And that's one of the things that's really interesting. Tell me more about your background in immersive theater, if you don't mind.
Well, I went to art school. If we're going to go backwards, I went to art school and I was studying fine art. And I found myself making a lot of sculpture-based work, a lot of installation art, light-based work that was kind of working to create a mood. And I had a tutor at the time who said, look, this work is really interesting, but, I was like a typical tormented artist. I could only work, late at night, and maybe I wouldn't finish, or maybe I would. And he was like, look, you're setting yourself up for a life of misery. I think that your skills, there's a different course that is called Design for Performance, and it's still in the School of Fine Art, but it's a little more structured. And I think that maybe you could benefit from taking that course. And so that's what I did. And I'm very grateful to him for that, because he was right. And I grew up in London, and I went to university in London. I went to an art school called Central St. Martin's. And it's a very it was in the School of Fine Arts still. It was a very conceptual course. It was like what is a performance? Like that was the question.
Oh wow.
Like right now this is a performance. You know what I mean? Like me picking up my phone. Like that's a performance. You know.
Yes.
So and so, but within that, you could be as abstract or not as you wanted. Like they would give you a source text to start with, and then everybody was free to interpret it however they wanted. And much to their dismay, I found myself doing more kind of structured commercial stuff, which. And I was really trying to like very specifically story tell through spaces. And so that led me to working a little bit with a company called Punch Drunk that does a lot of immersive theater. Like the designers from Punch Drunk, one of them had gone to my school and done my course a few years ahead of me.
Interesting.
And so I had an opportunity to intern with them, and their productions are really special.
Nice.
The action is, they'll decorate an entire space, and the audience is the performance is happening around you, and the audience
That's
is
awesome.
not part. The audience is not part of it. It's not an actor, but you are walking around, experiencing the thing happening around you, and so.
That's amazing.
So from there, I then, just to compress a little bit, I moved to New York to work on a show that they were opening here called Sleep No More. And then from that, they all went back to London. And then from that, I kind of got a lot of work in like immersive branding, like a chauffeur, like Nike wanted to do to sell their Olympic line in an immersive way, and so we designed the locker rooms for these athletes, and so you could go in, and each of them smelt differently and at a different floor, and it kind of worked alongside the athletes' personality and the clothes that they wanted to sell, so on and so forth, and then. Then I started working with another immersive company, but who did branded content. And then from there, I met somebody who said, "Hey, I think you'd be great for this movie." And so
that's awesome.
That's how I started. And the first movie I ever worked on was, as a production designer, was a horror movie.
Oh, wow.
And, I feel like it was kind of the right beginning project, right? Because horror is also so immersive.
Right? Yeah.
You're having visceral reactions to what you're seeing and what's happening and so on. So, and then, one thing led to another, and here we are.
That's awesome. Wow, that's really interesting. And I think that one of the things that's always fascinated me about production design is that it's literally the scale of the world building. The absolute. I remember one of the first films that I worked on that I saw like really amazing production design was I worked on a movie in LA, Angels and Demons with Ron Howard, and they were filming. We were filming in they couldn't get St. Peter's Square in Rome. So they made it in the middle of a parking lot in LA. And so, you have all of these big old, box cars that were just aligned, assigned. And then they had all of the facade inside. And when you walked in there, it was mind blowing that I'm 5 minutes from the beach, and, you could hear we were right in the flight path of LAX. And so every couple of minutes a plane, they'd have to cut for the planes. But it was Rome, and and it sells it in the movie. It looks like Rome, and it's absolutely fascinating that, and especially with some of the new tech that you see going into things like The Mandalorian and such. Like there's a lot of cool new tech. How are some of the technological advances affecting your work?
That's a tough question, because I feel like if you ask a lot of production designers, it's very exciting, but it's also kind of this challenge of keeping the design work in the practical world, because then once you pass it off, there are so many talented people working in post-production, and they're really also doing a lot of the design work in that realm, unless we as production designers actively kind of pursue close collaboration, which I did with the most wonderful VFX supervisor on Y, because on Y we shot in Toronto, and as I mentioned, it's a road show, and the beginning of the season takes place in New York, and we couldn't go to New York, and so we had to kind of put our heads together about how to do that, and it's kind of incredible because there's a scene outside the Pentagon, and we did it in a parking lot in downtown Toronto. And obviously, like everywhere you look, there's Toronto, and there's the highway, and there's this, there's that. But I found this section of parking lot that I thought, okay, I just imagined, okay, if we put the fence here, and if he could put the Pentagon there, and then we'll have the crowd here, and there's a way to make this work with the set extension. But then COVID happened, and we had a limit on the number of extras. So not only did we have to do set extension to put the actual Pentagon in, because we were shooting in a parking lot in Toronto, not outside the Pentagon, but we also had to we also had to extend the crowd, and there's such cool technology now that allows you to scan the location, and I can hand off my concept drawings, and then basically my concept drawings are interactive, and it's really helpful for the DPs and the director, who's like, I have 50 people, but it needs to look like 5,000, and it helps them visualize kind of what it could be. And we could walk around the set in a 3-dimensional way. We could be like, oh, let's put the people here, and that's a much simpler version than what The Mandalorian is doing, for example. But the technology is definitely mind-opening.
It's absolutely mind-opening. Yeah, it makes it like, because I mean, you go back, and I was watching, like, what was it, Jason and the Argonauts, or one of those, and it's you got to give them credit in some of the old movies for trying to show, or even The Wizard of Oz. I remember, working on one of the stages that was used in The Wizard of Oz at Sony's lot out in LA, and you could still see where they had up in the stage, the sound stage, you could still see the tracks that they were using to get the flying monkeys back and forth. It's still up there, and it's pretty cool. But when you think about the just the leaps and bounds that we're moving forward, it's really interesting. But it still comes back to the art, that the concept that is created, and that's what you guys are creating, and that's so interesting to me.
But one of the things that's really cool about this really close relationship with VFX is that I can dream something up, and they could tell me how to make it better. How, like, what I could do practically that would help that. It's a very symbiotic relationship. So yeah,
that's really awesome. Well, there was a couple things that you touched on that was interesting. Now, first of all, I want to come back to how you talk about approaching set design is all about feelings. To me, that's extremely interesting because I'm studying screenwriting, and I'm doing my master's in screenwriting, and my professors have been just drilling into us. What is the mood? What is the general theme, the underlying mood and theme that you're going for? It's not just about because you take, and this is where people don't always understand how important a setting is, because, like, you take a Western and you put it in the Old West, that's interesting. When you take that same Western and put it in space, you get Star Wars. You know what I mean? And it's like, right. So setting is really interesting. So, but the feeling is interesting. Can you talk to me more about how feelings play into your set design?
Well, I think if we want to boil it down to its most simplest form, right? If something is green or if it's red, you're gonna experience that very differently. Yeah.
Yes.
So it's about kind of what colors do, what textures do. I designed a movie once, directed by Ira Sachs, called Little Men, and it's about a family, and a family moves into the grandfather's apartment after he died, and they renovated the apartment, but then there's also a scene in the apartment, so we had to transform it where it was still the grandfather's place, and and the movie, the protagonists of the movie are children. And so, I was kind of thinking about how to approach the design of the project. And I thought to myself, okay, well, as an adult, there are certain things I remember from my childhood. Like you'll remember like the specific smell of your grandmother's gloves, or you'll remember, you might not remember anything else about the room, but you remember the tweed on the sofa and where the thread was coming up that you used to play with it. So I thought, okay, so I'm going to try to design this based on this idea of memory and certain things standing out. And so I wanted it to be, so I designed the grandfather's space in a very textural way, and one of the children's bedrooms is a little bit stylized in contrast with the rest of the movie, but I designed it in a way where it would be like kind of it wasn't how necessarily it was, but how, if he grew up, how he would remember it to have been.
Oh, interesting.
So
that's a really interesting way to look at it. Yeah, I remember I grew up my parents grew up at this one university, and they were teachers there, and it was huge. It was just this massive university, and I remember the sheer scale of this school. I went back when I was an adult. It was actually a very small college that I could walk across the entire college it was like 5 minutes. It was just this very short campus. But yet I was like, as a child, it was just scale. And that's a really interesting thing of designing it from the child's perspective. And you have to have a different kind of, scaling and things. That's fascinating to me. Now,
so that plays into the sense of feeling, right? It's like, okay, do you want to feel nostalgic? Do you want to feel like it's slick? Do you want to feel cold? Do you want to feel existential?
Yeah. Well, I'm a huge film photographer. I love shooting on film. And so in one of the basic fundamental choices you have as a film photographer is Kodak or Fuji, because those are the two main film brands that you still can get. There used to be a lot more, but now that's it. Kodak is warm. The orange tones play up. It's a very warm film. It feels very golden, and it's got this warm tone to it, versus Fuji is very green. And and so it's much, even something as simple as that. Like if I shoot Fuji photos, the photos feel sad, tiny bit. Like it's just, there's this a little bit of this, because it's very cool colors and there's this green tones to it. And I've noticed that, like, and people, when I show them my photos from Kodak, they're like, these feel so happy. You guys look so happy. And it's just because of the warmer tones. And it's really interesting that it's the same content. I literally would shoot the same stuff, but people perceive it differently just on the color. It pops into one of the things that you just talked about is the simple color choices. Do you ever see the movie Hero?
I haven't seen that, no.
It's a Chinese movie that was a Jet Li movie. And the director, it was really interesting because he shoots the movie in 5 segments, and each segment has a different color tone. One segment, everything's blue. The next segment, everything's red. The next segment, everything in the set design is white. It's really
I'm going to watch that. That sounds crazy. Okay.
Yeah. Hero. Take a look at Hero with Jet Li.
I will.
It's unreal. And
I just got new TV, so I'm ready to see it, like in Technicolor.
There you go. There you go. It's one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. Now, where do you go for your own inspiration when you want to watch stuff that you go, now that is amazing set design. Now that is something that I would like to do someday?
Well, I feel like inspiration is everywhere, right? And I think that it sounds a bit cheesy, but it's true. No. And so, like, when people ask me, okay, what advice would you have for people, aspiring to be designers? It's just like, remember to look around, and it's going to be where you least expect it. I see, it comes from everywhere. I love going to museums and galleries. I love going to the theater. And to be honest, after 2 years in Toronto, it would have been incredibly inspiring anyway, but then leaving Canada and then going to Spain and to Italy and walking around Florence, like, it's just reinvigorates the senses. And so I feel like sometimes in between projects, you can kind of, I don't know, get stuck watching Netflix for 6 hours a day, and that's like super fun, and you're into it, and you're immersing yourself in a world. It's inspiration, but sometimes it's nice to just go out. And just be in the world. I remember being really stuck about the design of a really big set for a show I did, because I think the showrunner wasn't totally sure about what they wanted, and so I was trying to figure out how to kind of inspire them to get to a place where they were feeling really excited about one direction or another, and I just went out to, during the day, I went out, walked around my neighborhood, and I went to all of my favorite bars and restaurants, not drinking or eating, but just to go and like a pilgrimage to them to see, okay, well, what is it that I like about this place? And that was and then I came back and I remembered, this detail from here and this detail from there, and I was able to put that together to present, and that ended up being kind of the shape of the set that we built.
That's really awesome. I lived in the U.S. first for most of my life, but then I moved to Vietnam 2001 on and off. And one of the things here is that it's an outdoor culture. It's a motorcycle culture.
Yeah.
Like, one of the things with riding a motorcycle is you see stuff way more. You perceive stuff. You have to kind of watch what's going on around you. And like, one of the things too, like, I find that when I get into a car, I'd be driving a place back in the States, I just, kind of hunker down, turn on the radio, watch the road. But when you're outdoor, I think that so often we forget to look around us. And I love that idea of there is so much beauty around us. One of my favorite movies for that was the concept that they showed with that was American Beauty. It's just so it's such that scene where he films the balloon just kind of dancing around.
The mundane, right? The everyday can be really amazing. And I feel like like every project that I work on, it's there's something that from just going out and going to a museum or going to a bar has like sparked something that has entered the project. Like right before I did I went to an amazing exhibition at the Brooklyn Museum, and I was like, wow, the scale of these things and the gravity of the work. Really struck me, and then I got the script or I didn't get the script, I got the whatever. I spoke to the showrunner of Why, and I was really taken by this show, and so that's kind of one of the things that I talked about, and it's one of the things, it's like the feeling of that is kind of how we approach the design of the world of Why.
That's really awesome. Now, you had mentioned one thing of like the troubles that you run into on set, especially with the COVID. Now, how much of your job is like spent in problem solving? You have this vision and then you're trying to create it. Like, is there a lot of that, or do you guys plan so well beforehand that there's not much of that?
Well, the goal is to plan so well that there's no problem solving at all. But no, it's an entire exercise in dodging curveballs. You're always like, woo. There's always something, because you're going to find the best location, and you're ready to, and you're like, I'm going to take down the wall, and it's going to be great. And then you take down the wall, and you're like, oh my gosh, now the house is not structurally sound, or something, or the engineer was wrong, or I don't know, or like the actor got sick, or we lost the locations, or something. There's always something, and I think the kind of wonderful thing about this industry is how adaptable it makes everybody, and how resilient. And I feel like that's stuff that translates into your personal life too,
right?
Because you're and the thing is also is that the film is such a collaborative art. Every single person's contribution from the bottom to the top is valuable and affects the whole. And so it's there are always curveballs, and there's collaboration, and there are interpersonal challenges sometimes, and you have to make space for all of that, and you have to be flexible.
Yeah. Well, that's really interesting. Now,
creatively and also technically, and then practically, and it's a big management job too.
Yes, I I was shooting a music video. We're just exiting a long lockdown here in Vietnam, and I was shooting a music video for my wife, and I ordered a bunch of lights. My team went and picked up the lights. We're setting up for shooting. It was the wrong lights. It was completely. And I mean, and at that moment, like, I studied philosophy in university, and one of the things that I love is, well, even Bruce Lee would be like water, just that you got to be adaptable, And so I was like, well, these are the lights we got. I absolutely know that there's no way I can send these back right now because there's still curfew. And so I was like, well, let's make them work. How do we put this into play? And because you sometimes you have to just adapt. And I mean, it's a different type of situation, but like, you make it work with what you got. Now,
well, I can say two things about that, which is
I'd love to hear.
Number one, everybody saw the pictures of the giant ship stuck in the Suez Canal, right? And everybody saw it. And I would say that in the film industry and many other industries, but speaking for us, we really felt the repercussions of that because it affected the global supply chain in a way that I never, living in the privileged West, I never knew would be such an issue. And so we had to adapt constantly. This thing isn't available. That thing isn't available. And then a second thing related to that is, one of my favorite movies ever is this is Spinal Tap, and I can really relate to, Stonehenge coming down the wrong size, like the tiny Stonehenge. I think it's every production designer's fear. But sometimes it happens. Maybe you'll buy something on Etsy and you thought it was big and it's like this, and you have to figure out what to do.
Oh man, I always think about that scene from Zoolander where he's standing in front. He's like, "What is this? A library for ants?"
Exactly, a library for ants. Yeah.
But hopefully the ants can read. With that, no, you hit. I think that this last year has been a masterclass in being adaptable, and it's definitely something that we're seeing in a lot of different industries. But when I talk to many different creatives, whether it's in music or film, people have had to kind of try to find new ways to do things because some things that you didn't. And it's weird with the global supply chain stuff. There are things that you wouldn't assume would be hard to get that suddenly become ridiculously hard to get.
Really hard. Yeah, really hard. And also the price of lumber has gone up, and everybody is feeling that. But when you're trying to build a lot of sets, like your cost is exponentially increasing, and so you have to figure what to do. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I don't think a lot of people realize how much is actually built for movies. Like people, I think, will see a house and assume that house is a real house. And sometimes it is, but quite often that interior is on a soundstage or, it has actually been physically built. And how much of what you put into movies is made versus what you kind of find and adapt?
I think it really depends on the project. I would say it depends on the budget too, right?
Yeah.
I would say it's 50-50. Maybe you build a lot more in television or on like large budget projects and you do on smaller ones. But I would say that even if it's a real house in a location, it's more often than not completely transformed. So, okay, so we're going to get the shell of this place, but maybe those doors weren't here. We put them in and we've switched the art and we've painted and we've wallpapered or changed the carpet to kind of alter the setting. Sometimes I like working, I love building sets because then you have control over absolutely everything. But sometimes I love, and maybe it's because of my experience in immersive theater, I love using real locations because then the history and the story of the place kind of plays into it, and then you have there are built-in parameters which sometimes make the work better. It might change the blocking, or it might change where you put a light, or you might discover the way the light comes through the window in a certain way that you couldn't have anticipated if it was a built set. I mean, you could have designed it to be that way, but sometimes happenstance is really beautiful. And I think that, the funny thing about production design is, yes, you can have, the futuristic worlds, or you can be in the 1800s, or you could be wherever, but some of the hardest design work is invisible. Right?
Tell me more about that. Because that's interesting.
Well, it's this idea of, okay, so let's say that we're going to shoot a movie about a couple in a Brooklyn apartment.
Okay.
Yeah, there are hundreds, thousands of apartments of, couples in their 30s in a Brooklyn apartment. But what is it about the apartment that speaks specifically to these characters? And how, like, when something looks so, it's hard to make things look really naturalistic because everything is specifically placed for the shots.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, like, how do you make it look like I just had my lunch here if I'm not here? Like, yes, many lunches have happened at the table, but there wasn't a lunch right there, right when we shot,
Yeah.
And so you have to make that look lived in and believable. And there's a lot of thought that goes into that. You have to really be an observer of how people are.
No, that's so true. And you have to be there's a couple things that you pointed out too, like almost like, how do you keep something real when it's obviously not? You know what I mean? Like, and that's one of the things, like, I came up as an actor before I got behind the camera. And there's something as simple as, like, so I'm holding a pen right now because I'm using my Post-it notes with what you're telling me to take notes so I can kind of go down topics. But, like, if I'm an actor and I'm holding a pen, and then all of a sudden, I start doing the scene and I'm like, well, hang on, how do I hold a pen? Do I hold a pen like this? And, there's some things about, like, that's something so natural, but, like, how do you make it seem natural when it, does that make any sense at all? Like,
yeah, totally.
When you're trying to convey realness, when it's not always real, it's tricky.
And it's also giving the actor the right pen, right?
Yes.
Because depending on what they need to do with it. Like, is it their pen that they're, like, obsessively chewing because they're nervous? Or is it, like, are they doing calligraphy with it? Like, what's happening in the scene? And, because every single item in the room or prop or piece of clothing kind of helps inform the bigger picture, right? So it all needs to be right. Because if something's off, then it maybe throws other things off, too.
One of my favorites for that was that I don't know who did the set design, but it was a Forrest Whitaker movie, and he played this hitman samurai. It's an older movie, and it was just, what was it called? I'll move on from it. But it was a really simple set, but yet it was this perfect balance of, like, lived in and also just perfectly set up. And it was interesting because you were transformed. And I think that that's kind of one of the things too is, and this is what I was going to ask you about too, is, like, I mean, your world building, you guys are literally, if you think about something like an extreme example would be the Lord of the Rings, Hobbiton, where they created the entirety of Hobbiton. And it was, for people watching, it was a real world. Yeah. Now, totally. How do you enter into world building? How do you wrap your mind around some of that?
Sometimes it can be daunting. You're like, wow, how am I going to build this whole world? It's like when you get a script, and it's very dense and you've got so many ideas and you kind of have to synthesize down, you got to synthesize kind of what it is you're going to be able to do. I think it can be really overwhelming to think, well, I have to do this and I have to do that and I got to build this and I have to build that and I got to buy. I think you just go one step at a time. So maybe you're not imagining all of the Hobbit world, but maybe you're starting with Bilbo's house and expanding from there, or something. Maybe it's scripted that every day at noon they go to get their mail. So maybe you start with where they wake up and the journey from the house to the mail and what they see, and then you kind of build on from there. And then you start. For me, I mean, it really depends on the project, because maybe I'll imagine the whole neighborhood or something, or the whole world of the movie. But sometimes it helps to start for me to start small or with a character or something I can really latch onto and flesh out, because that will then inform everything else.
That's really interesting. Well, that's an interesting point, because it's like, it's like that old, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. You know what I mean? I think that when you get too far ahead of yourself, sometimes anything can be daunting. And so,
well, you have to identify a theme. So, in After Yang, we knew it was set in the future. We knew it was about this family. But, thematically, there's so many themes. But one of the things that we wanted was to present a future world that was very green. And, it was sort of after some kind of unknown cataclysmic event that caused humans to kind of adapt the way that they live. And that's all subtext, right? You don't see that, but what we wanted was to feel a symbiosis between the natural world and the human world. And so that principle informed all the rest of the design. So you can start that way too, thematically.
Yeah, interesting. So you start from, could be like you say, so character movements, or you start with a location, or you could work your thing. That's so interesting. Now, what are some of your favorite movies?
There's so many.
Right.
That's a hard. I don't know. That's a hard question.
Okay.
Because
Let me reframe
I also really
it.
I'm bad because I like stupid movies too.
Oh, I love them too. You're stuck on an island. I was asked this question. You're stuck on an island, and you want to have a couple core movies that you go to make you feel good. Something you can watch again and again.
Clueless. Gotta have that.
Nice.
I would say Spinal Tap. I would say Tony Erdmann.
Tony Erdmann. I don't know Tony Erdmann.
Oh my gosh, it's an amazing movie. I'm blanking on the filmmaker's name, but it's a German movie, and it's really incredible. That is a movie about life. In the Mood for Love. Nice. There's so many. I can't. It's like hundreds, thousands. I'm like, look out here. I have a huge. You can't see it, but I have a huge poster on my wall here, and it's from a distributor, and it has like tiny little thumbnails from each of the movies. And that's so I'm looking up, and I'm seeing. What am I seeing? Like, that's Whale Rider. This is
that's
Three Colors. This is Three Colors Blue. Oh my gosh. I love gangster movies too. I will take. I would take. I would take Lock, Stock. I would take Sexy Beast. Yeah. I would take all of the Bond movies with me. I would take Goodfellas.
Oh yeah, right.
Yeah.
Goodfellas.
Yes.
Goodfellas is great with Ray Liotta and.
I would take North by Northwest.
Oh yeah.
You know what I would take if I want to be scared shitless is Night of the Hunter.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Or the original Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Those are two movies that I feel like are really immersive and are creating a mood. And it's black and white.
Yeah, right.
That is really incredible.
Well, that's one of the things. I think that one of the things that was most amazing for me if you start looking at like the concept of world building, I think the first example of that before Hollywood was the first movie that they put up in movie theaters of a train, and the train came toward the camera, and literally as the train started getting ready to like pass where the camera was at, people were just climbing out of their chairs and diving out of the way because they thought the train was going to come out of the screen, because there was just like this inability to conceptualize. And like, to me, I was like, oh, that's amazing. It doesn't have to be complicated. It just has to be something that's terrifying.
Well, this is not terrifying, but it's this. I love Singing in the Rain, and I love kind of when they pull back. I love I love musicals, and I love the theatricality of that. But I love that moment where they pull back the curtain and they see that actually who they thought was singing is not actually singing.
That's what we were talking about with this podcast.
Yeah.
That there's a bunch of people behind the curtain. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Well, what advice would you give to, let's imagine you can go back in time. We're not creating any Loki variants or new timelines, Back to the Future, but you can go back and give your younger self advice. What type of advice would you give your younger self?
I would say that you have to, you probably just have to go for it. Just go for it and trust that, ideas come from all different kinds of places, and you got to have, sometimes there are bad ideas to get to good ideas, and inspiration and creativity kind of comes from everywhere, and your contribution is really valid.
I love that. Your contribution is valid.
Yeah, your contribution is really valid. Whether you're starting out and you're working as a PA, or you're a graphic designer and you're seeing your designs, translated, on screen. Everybody's contribution is really valid. It's such a collaborative industry. So everyone has something to give.
Yeah, right. That's beautiful.
And just remember that, because sometimes, you can get lost in imposter syndrome or self-doubt or not know where to start. Just, use the, Lord of the Rings as an example. You have to start somewhere, right? So just take something and go with it.
Now, what would you love to work on in the future? What would be your dream project?
I know a dream project, because I love all the projects I've worked on because they've all been so different. But since I've been talking to you just now, I really would like to do a nice, sexy gangster movie. I would like to do like a modern Rafifi or something. Like, I don't want to remake Rafifi because it doesn't need to be remade. But, something with intrigue and suspense, and that's kind of juicy, I think, maybe is what I'd like to do.
Nice. Well,
or something. Sorry, there's a lag.
No. Continue.
Sorry. I could talk forever, so you should just probably cut me off. Or something. My favorite projects are the ones that are kind of slightly elevated in some way. Now that it can still be naturalistic and grounded in reality, but I like kicking it up a notch, and it could be as subtle or not subtle as the project requires, but something a little hyper real.
I like that. Well, that's awesome. Well, I definitely have learned a ton today, so I wanted to just say thank you for me and all the people watching. That's really awesome.
Thanks for chatting.
No worries. Would you like to? Do you have any other cool last minute, wisdom drops that you'd love to share with people?
I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, I don't know. That's like a 5-hour conversation, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for coming on, and I appreciate your time.